Welcome to our studio here in Dublin and to this very special edition of Ask the Expert webinar. Today we're going to be talking about an issue which is on most Europeans' minds, which is the elections, which are coming up in the beginning of June this year. They're elections which will shape the future direction, the future policy of the European Union. They're important to us all, and we today will be discussing really what the key challenges are for Europe in that context as we face the future. So thank you for joining us this morning. We're delighted to have so many of you from across the European Union. And today we're going to discuss the challenges with key experts who have raised issues and delved into the depths of the various challenges which face us at the moment. In recent years, as you all know, the European Union has faced a polycrisis. We had the Great Recession, which was followed rather rapidly by the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we had the war in Ukraine, which triggered issues and a surge in energy and food prices. And then, of course, we saw that a cost of living crisis took hold across the European Union. We have also issues which are happening at an international level, which will clearly have an impact on Europe, not least the shocking conflict ongoing in the Middle East. But I suppose it is fair to say that on the surface at least, Europe has come through on these crises to a large degree. We have seen the COVID-19 pandemic. We bounced back in terms of employment. Rates are back to strong highs. And we have seen also that inflation is beginning to stabilise, if not reduce. So on some fronts, one would say that the European Union has done well in the face of these challenges. However, we are also seeing certain tensions arise. And I suppose that is what we're talking about when we look at the challenges that the European Union is facing. We see the social fabric, which is really under some level of threat. We're seeing trust, which is being eroded across the European Union, not only in the institutions, but also in the police, in the media, in our other healthcare institutions, for example. And we are trying to see how that's playing out across the communities. It is having an effect already on issues like, for example, housing. We're seeing a housing crisis across the European Union when affordable and adequate housing is quite simply almost impossible for many people to find. And that's impacting most strongly younger Europeans. What will be the future for those young Europeans is something that we want to look at today. And we're looking also at how that impacts on intergenerational tensions between those who have and those potentially who have not. And we're also seeing that roll out in the quality of life areas of how life in the rural and urban areas are seeing increasing divides and how perhaps that's causing also tensions and inequalities amongst citizens. But it's not only in the area of quality of life, we're also seeing it in the world of work. We're seeing how that's changed over the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw people really moving back to their homes to work, and that telework phenomenon has continued over recent times and looks set to into the future. How will that change things? How has that changed things for young people, for example, for older people, but also for women, for men? Is it having a disproportionate and divided impact on those who are at work? And does that ability to be able to work from home, does it apply to all? Is there inequalities creeping in terms of who can access this new way of working? And of course, there's the aspect of the right to disconnect. If we're always working and we're unable to separate home from work, what does that mean to have this always-on culture? And of course, we have the meta challenges. Eurofound's Next Work programme, which starts in 25 to 28, is already looking at the meta drivers. So, for example, we're looking at technological change and digitalisation and how that impacts and how that threatens some of our ways of working and living. We're looking at globalisation, as we talked about before, the international trends and how that will impact. But we're also looking at things like, for example, we're looking at the demographic crisis and how that's challenging and has issues in terms of migration and looking at social cohesion. And of course, we're looking at the climate crisis, and we'll delve into that today as well, how we can really achieve a just transition for all. So I'd like you to get ready for the debate we're going to have with our experts. And really we want to engage with you. We want to hear your questions and we want to have your feedback. So follow us on social media. Feel free to put your questions into the chat. They will be managed throughout the process, and we look forward to hearing from you. So without further ado, I will introduce my panel here today. I'm joined by Barbara Gerstenberger, who is the head of the Working Life Unit here at Eurofound and an expert in all things working and living. Beside her is Maria Jepsen, who is our Deputy Director, and she will be talking to us about lots of things, but particularly on the green transition. And Massimiliano Mascherini, that's the first time I've ever got that one wrong, Massi, who is head of unit of the Social Policies Unit. And he will be looking at the issues I've raised, particularly about young people, trust, and also looking at the housing. So let's get started. I would like to ask you, Massi, to set the scene really, because I raised the issue about trust and how trust really is the glue that holds us all together in terms of social cohesion. And it has been impacted by what has happened over the recent years. Can you talk to us about what that impact has been and what kind of trends are we seeing?
Yes, thanks, Mary. As you said, Europe has faced and is facing a polycrisis, several very important crises that are affecting our bloc. We can say that at this moment we have thriving economies, thriving labor markets with high level of participation and a good economic momentum. So Europe we can say that Europe has weathered well this crisis. However, there is a gap. There is a gap between these thriving economies and the living condition experiences of our citizens. The result is that trust in institutions, but also trust in general, has decreased since the onset of the pandemic. We recorded with the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a kind of rally around the flag in the first moment of the pandemic, with the level of trust that were increasing for governments. And then after that, when the pandemic unfolded, actually, and the other crises started to kick in, the trend of trust in institutions started to decrease. And so we arrive now at European elections with lower level of trust in institutions than before. The main reason can be this gap between the thriving economy labor market and the living condition experiences that are different from the various citizens. As you mentioned, we have had the cost of living actually that created the increase, especially of food and essential services. We had the issue of the rise of energy prices with the problem of energy poverty kick in actually. Then housing. I mean, in most of Western countries, affording good quality housing became a luxury for a large part of the population. And this actually has induced a kind of fragmentation in our society with the different groups that are facing these challenges with quite a high level of difficulties and importance. So these are triggered a feeling of not feeling heard, not feeling listened in terms of needs,
not being recognized,
and then. Let's say that social media just put petrol on these, creating, aggravating and amplifying these feelings, and therefore this detachment from the institutions that are seen as elements that are not listening the needs of the population.
And Massi, I mean, you've outlined some of the drivers there as well and how they've impacted, but can you play into how that's affecting different cohorts, and particularly, for example, young people?
Of course. Well, young people is usually the part of the population where the level of trust is higher. Now, young people are facing multiple challenges. We know that traditionally, but especially since the 2008 crisis, the entrance of young people in the labor market is not anymore a series of linear steps, actually, but it traces back and forth on being unemployed, being in needs, being in traineeship that sometimes is not paid, actually. So a difficult entrance in the labor market. And this is accompanied now by a surge of the cost of housing. Access to housing of young people is more difficult actually than the other part of the population. The main reason is the affordability. So we see in the data that actually there is a delayed nest living. We know that the first step towards a transition to adulthood is leaving parental home. What we see is in the majority of the member states, the age at which young people leave a parental home in the last 5 years has increased considerably. And one of the main reasons of this actually is the surge of the cost of housing, because we saw that access to buy a house for young people now is very, very difficult. And young people is just one of the population that is at risk. Actually, we can say then that the surge of the cost of living actually has created problems to all the part of the population that has low income. So there are multiple tensions, actually. There is tension between young people and older generation, between men and women, actually, as well, with the gender pay gap and the participation to labor market of women that is still there, has not improved recently. And then, on the other hand, more recently, the gap between rural and urban communities has increased. We know that rural areas have been always characterized by a lower level of income or a lower level of human capital in comparison to urban areas, but recently this gap has increased more and is seen with attention actually the possible implication of the transition to a green economy and the impact that this may have on rural areas. These basically what accompanied actually the demonstration of the farmers actually in the recent February, and again here we also feel we also see actually a need of being listened, of being recognized by the institutions on their own needs actually.
And Massi, do we see a lower level of trust in those rural areas than you would in urban areas, or is it the other way around?
No, we see a much lower level of trust in rural areas. These social and economic disparities between rural and urban areas has profound implications in social cohesion. Together with this need or this lack of recognition and lack of being listened in terms of needs, actually, what we see is that a much lower level of trust in rural areas in comparison to urban areas, as well as a much lower satisfaction in democracy and how democracy works. And I think that this is very concerning, actually, especially because we are now approaching the European elections, but it is in general a concerning phenomenon.
So in fact, what you're saying is that trust generally is an issue, but in fact, it's targeted specifically at certain areas, which is sort of exacerbating the issue in particular areas, like in the rural areas, but also younger people who had higher trust are now seeing issues which are impacting on that. So I suppose this is basically the foundations on which we're looking at this future Europe, where we're building a new future, a new European Union post the elections in June, but based on an element of trust which is really under threat.
Yes, as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, actually, there are several tensions among the different groups. The risk that we are seeing now is the risk of social fragmentations on the development of several groups that are in competition with each other, that these undermine actually the rush for the overall good, actually. And this risk of fragmentation has, unfortunately, the potential of undermining the social cohesion of our societies. Each group actually experiences different living conditions, and this is what drives actually this different level and this decrease of trust. So these are things that we needed to address actually in the next future in order to start to rebuild the trust tissue and the social cohesion tissue in our member states.
And I don't want to dwell too much on the issue of trust because we have so much else to talk about, but just in terms of how we know we can address this issue of trust, we do know certain aspects that could be put in place to enhance trust. So, for example, public services, improving them, improving access to them. Are there other things that we know we could do to improve or boost the levels of trust?
Well, I think that, as you mentioned, public service is the face of our institutions in the territory. So, especially in rural areas, actually, implementing and designing well-working public services, this will trigger clearly the feeling that institutions are with us. And this holds actually in all the geographical areas, but especially in the rural. Then providing support to those that are struggling. Actually, we know that there are revision of social protection systems in order to create social protection for all, and this is very important because it's important that our citizens can face the cost of living crisis in a good way, actually, and then also with the policy design. People need to be listened, and they have this need that is important. So, especially for the rural and urban, actually, moving to a combination between people-based policies, so policies that address the different groups, actually, the needs of the different groups, together with the place-based policies. Because in the different areas, people experience different problems. Young people in rural areas experience problems that are different from young people in the cities, as well as the other.
So no one size fits all.
No,
the solution.
One size fits none.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just moving on that, Barbara, it's not clearly, these challenges are not confined to, living clearly. They're also found very much and maybe emerging in the world of work. And trust is one element which, funnily enough, needs to play out also in the world of work for things to work, and perhaps even more so in this remote working environment. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, remote working, the massive switch to telework for many of us has really been a game changer during the pandemic, or caused by the pandemic. I mean, if we think back, basically from one day to the next, suddenly everybody who could possibly do their work remotely was obliged to do so. And what started initially, you could argue, as a big and even if unplanned experiment in March 2020, then continued long after lockdowns were lifted. So if we look at numbers today, well, first of all, if we look back before the pandemic, around 14% of workers in Europe were always or sometimes working from home. And then in 2021, it was suddenly almost a quarter of workers who had this opportunity and made use of this opportunity. And it has dropped a little bit since then, but basically it's stabilizing at around 1/5, 21, 22% of workers. Now, the other thing that we need to take into account is that the predominant form that remote work takes today is hybrid work. So an arrangement where some of the working time is spent at the employer's premises, but some of the working time is then spent working from home. And you could argue, well, that's always been the case. There have always been people who split their time between the office and another location. But it's the numbers. It's the numbers of workers and also the numbers of companies involved. That means we now have to think about this phenomenon mainly, basically, as a form of work organization. And that also means that we're no longer that concerned about the remote part, what is happening at home. We're mainly concerned about the interface, bringing it together, the working from home with the ability to focus more on certain tasks, and then coming to the office for for face-to-face interaction, for exchange, to ensure that there remains a sense of community, and also to maintain organizational culture, build that trust. Here we have the trust element again. Now, of course, you could ask, well, has anybody figured out yet how to do that perfectly? And if we look at the case study research that we do, the clear answer to that question is no. Nobody has yet found the silver bullet or the magic wand. What we see is that companies are basically feeling their way and are experimenting and are adapting their practices if they see this doesn't work and doesn't give us absolutely learning by doing. So again, not one size fits all, and not even yet a model that would fit for every sector, for every company, big or small. So you were earlier talking about new inequalities emerging maybe, and I think that's also something that we need to pay attention to when we discuss remote working. On the one hand, of course, it's quite clear that not every job is teleworkable. We did some research together with the Joint Research Center of the Commission, and the figure is around 38% of jobs in the EU of dependent employment in the EU is teleworkable, which means there's no need for physical manipulation of either things or people on-site. For that matter on site. Yeah. So 60%, a little more than 60% of jobs can simply not be done remotely. So that's a first inequality. But then it's also quite interesting to see that even in sectors where telework is very much possible because jobs are highly computerized, it is a much higher share of managers and professionals in those sectors who have access to remote work, to hybrid forms of work, compared to, for example, clerical workers or technicians whose jobs are equally computerized, sometimes even more computerized and technical, and still the share of those who have access to hybrid work arrangements is much lower compared to managers and professionals. So, we can see inequalities emerging also from this new trend towards hybrid work.
And just to go back to what I mentioned earlier, are we seeing differences rolling out also for different groups? For women, are there particular issues that will face women with this new way of working? Are there new issues that face perhaps older people?
Well, with regard to the gender gap, there's a small difference in the share of women making use or engaging in hybrid work, telework, remote work, compared to men. And that's mainly due to the fact that women are more presented in sectors and occupations that are teleworkable, because construction, manufacturing, etc., transport, these are jobs where physical presence is, or these are sectors where physical presence is necessary, and they are male dominated. So that's one of the reasons. The concern here is that we could also see inequalities as regards access to training, visibility, and therefore then possibilities or offers for promotion between those who are more frequently working from home compared to those who are in the office more often, more visible. Exactly. And if women continue to be more involved in hybrid work than men, then this could pan out as another glass ceiling, as another disadvantage. As regards gender differences, I think age differences, I think the main concern is how adaptable to these new ways of working and the use of technology that is required are older cohorts. If we think about the fact that older workers have less access to employer-paid training, for example, than younger cohorts. So again, there is at least a possible split and a possible...
I mean, there's a need there here for upskilling, learning, training, etc. for older people, perhaps not only older people. But I mean, I suppose that new technology, robotic technology, digitalization, it's here to stay. It's part of our working environment and very productively in lots of ways, I suppose. But does that pose those kind of threats to maybe security of employment, to to the kind of things that we're talking about, such as sustainable working life?
Yeah, I mean, technological change is always a disruptive force. I mean, that I think we should acknowledge. And we have on the one hand the shift towards remote working, and the other big disruptive force then is the development of advanced robotic systems and technologies. And that really is also an impressive change, because again, we are used to seeing production robots on shop floors. But if you recall the pictures in the past, they were basically behind a wall. They were in a cage. You did not get close because it was not safe to get closer. With technological developments, these robotic systems, these robots have been equipped with sensors, with all kinds of new functionalities. And that means they're now much closer to the human in the workplace. So for the first time, a real collaboration, working together on a daily basis is possible. Now, that can be a very good thing, because the robot can do for you what you don't really want to do. So repetitive tasks or physically very demanding tasks can be done by the robot, and the human can work in a safer environment, but then also focus more on the more varied tasks, the creative tasks, the social interaction. So an augmentation of the job content is possible. But that depends very much on how work is organized, because you also have the other example where robotic technology can actually restrict the freedom to decide how you are organizing your work. And there, picture the warehouse, where it's a computerized system that determines what is being fetched, how fast, and even the order of the packing. So the important thing is to leave some discretion, so discretionary use of those robots, and to put the human at the center and not the robot as a center. And if that is done, then there is really a possibility to complement and ease and augment work, as I said before. Job loss, of course, it's always out there, and we've looked at case studies where and how companies actually introduce these technologies. And you can say that in Europe, at least, there is a relatively cautious and slow approach. Because also, this is huge. It's a huge investment. This is expensive. So the business case has to be proven before companies go in and make that leap. So that's also why it's mainly big companies who introduce these technologies.
Who can afford to.
Exactly. But it's also important to say, if we ask, and that's what we did in our case, so what are the driving factors? Why are you doing this? Well, it's to increase competitiveness. It's to improve productivity. It's to reduce labor costs. And more than that, to actually address recruitment problems, not being able to get the right people. But if these are the driving forces, then I think it is clear that, yes, we have to expect job loss, even if for the moment we do not yet see that whole job profiles have been eradicated. It is very much about a change of jobs. But I think, as I said, we have to expect some job loss, but at the same also the development of new job profiles, and therefore job gains as well.
I suppose there we're looking already at development of new forms of employment, new jobs in the sort of the new world of work where the platform economy is seeing some level of increase. I mean, what is the growth there? What are we talking about in terms of figures? And, how disruptive is that technological development to the labour market?
Yeah, again, the question, how big is it? You could argue it's actually quite small. I mean, it's 1.5% of workers in the EU get more than 50% of their income from work from or through platform work. They're more platform workers, but the share of the income that they get is much lower. So it's second jobs mainly. So that's a small number. So why the concern? Just to recall, platform work is, of course, where algorithm and algorithmic management manifests itself the clearest, because we have the online platform, and the online platform uses an algorithm to bring together the individual or the organization that has to offer a service and the individual or organization that is looking for that service. So the algorithm brings them together, but does not establish a continuous employment relationship. Yeah. What is established is you do this task and this task only, or this project, and it can be a very small task. It can be a micro task. So that's the issue. And the concern is that this idea of algorithmic management is moving from the platform economy to the broader economy, so that we will actually end up with kind of a division of work, lots and lots of small tasks, even a global division of work. And the tasks are done not by employees of companies, but by self-employed workers. Oh, yeah. And then the question is, are these really self-employed workers? Yeah. Or is there actually a relationship of dependency with the platform? And if that is the case, these people should not be dealt with and treated as independent contractors. That's, of course, exactly where the European Directive on platform work comes in and tries to establish which is which. And then, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe good also to broaden the discussion here a little bit, Maria, on labour markets in general. I mean, we see that the changes have been disruptive. Disruption can be a good thing. It can create growth and development, innovation, creation. But I suppose, are we seeing the kind of disruption that really hasn't happened since the Industrial Revolution? Is it possible to happen without leaving people behind, and I suppose, or seeing some people lose out? And you've written about this, about the fact that alongside the green transition, that it really, it is important that we don't leave people behind. But is it possible for us, with such a dramatic shift and change, not to see some people just losing out?
I guess it depends on what policy measures are put in place and where they're put in place. I mean, with the two big disruptions, one of them Barbara was just speaking to, which is the whole digital transformation, and with the artificial intelligence coming into the mix, we will see a lot of disruption in the labour market. But mostly, basically, I think more, instead of replacing jobs, it's going to replace tasks. So it's going to redefine how we do our jobs. And I think understanding how this will play out and what kind of measures needs to be put into place to make sure that nobody's left behind is going to be really, really important. And I think the Directive of Platform Work is one step in terms of saying, okay, how are we going to deal with this new way of working? The second big transformation we have then is the climate change and the green transformation. And here we have two impacts on the labour markets or the employment. Let me talk to the labour markets to start out with, okay? And one of them is the direct impact of climate change. The most obvious one is the rise in extreme temperatures, whether it being cold or warm, and how that impacts work and job quality. And the second one is on the green transition, where it's a managed process in terms of trying to going towards a net zero economy. And these transformations are going to be profound in terms of how we produce, how we consume, how we live, and most of it coming via the energy provision. The energy provision, that was the Industrial Revolution, and now we're going into a new way of providing. Evolution. Yeah, moving forward and upwards. So, and that will have profound implications on, so as I said, like production, on consumption, how we live, and will impact on labour markets. Now, the way that it will impact on labour markets will very much depend on where you are, actually. Okay. And I think so. The regional aspect here is really important, and the way that the green transition will work its way through the labour markets are we will have job gains, we will have job losses, as we have in any, as we continuously have. We will also have, a need for new skills, and then we have the job redefinitions in terms of how jobs are carried out, or how the jobs are composed. Just think about in the construction sector, where retrofitting is huge in terms of meeting the net zero economy, and how that means that jobs are being redefined in terms of what you need to do. And not all of the jobs will become green, but I'll get back to that one. But so in that sense, it will impact certain sectors a lot, certain occupations a lot, but most importantly, it will have an impact across the board in the labor market. Exactly how, we know bits and bobs. We cannot set out the entire picture right now, and I think that's some of the difficulties we have in trying to really give a very clear picture of what's going to be the impact on the labor market. But let me go back to what the impact is then, what we know about the impact on the labor market. What we do know is that industries, sectors, occupations where there's a high energy consumption, fossil fuel energy consumption, we know these are the industries and sectors that are going to be profoundly impacted. If we go to the most obvious, that's fossil fuel extraction, so it's mining, where we know this is a sector that coal mining needs to disappear. It's going to disappear, and that means that these jobs they'll disappear. We'll have job losses there, and what we need to then do is to ensure that in the regions, and this is local, where these transformations happen, that there's a virtuous circle getting back another economic tissue to ensure that there's a positive economic dynamic that also ensures that people can remain and continue to have good living conditions in these regions. Now, it sounds simple. It's not simple. We've been there before, and we know that it's not easy to get these dynamics going to be a virtuous circle. But we also have learned a lot from the past experiences in terms of not making the bigger mistakes. But when we try to go in and try to make the estimates, we mostly do the estimates on saying we'll have these big transformations in terms of reducing the really polluting and fossil fuel dependent sectors. And we will have more renewable energy sectors that will grow, construction will grow, the recycling economy will start to go, and so forth. So when we go in and we do these bigger estimates, we mostly find a net positive effect. Okay, so I think earlier estimates said, well, it could be negative, but most of the estimates that come out over the past 5 years all come out with a net positive effect. But that's an average.
Perhaps not a huge one. But
no, it's not. It's not. It's somewhere between 0 and 2%. Okay, so it's not like we're going to suddenly have a growth that goes up to 10% in terms of employment. But it's not going to imply huge job losses.
It's replacement of those jobs in different ways. Plus,
yes, So in that sense, now what's important, of course, when you look at this is what kind of jobs are we going to create? And here Eurofound has done some work on it, and so what the jobs that will be created, of course, are very important in terms of what job quality will come out, and then the job quality is impacted directly by the climate change per se, what I was talking about, the extreme temperatures, but also with regard to the job losses and the job creation and the job redefinitions that we'll experience. And what we can see now is that there will be creation of what we would call good quality jobs that is linked to the greening of the economy. And then we'll come back to what does that actually mean? So to the greening of the economy on the one hand, but we will also see a host of jobs that will be created in occupation sectors that is linked to the greening of the economy that does not particularly have very good job quality characteristics. And here one can say it's in the waste management industry. Clearly is very important in terms of going towards the net zero economy. We need more jobs in this sector. job quality as it is right now is not among the best. But with the digitalization, these things can change. So I think a lot of the ways that we try to predict these things are based on what we know now. But we know with the digitalization and introduction of robots, this can change radically what the job quality is about. So I think it's a very, some industries, sectors will be hit fairly hard. Some regions will be impacted stronger than others. And the impact on job quality is also something that, you know, it has two trajectories.
And that we would have to watch.
And that would have to be managed and watched and ensure that when we generate the jobs, we think about not only the number of jobs, but also the quality of the jobs that we're creating.
And I mean, in that context, Maria, when we talked earlier, in fact, in both areas about young people and the impact these challenges and changes have had and will have on them, I mean, youth employment is at a 10-year low in the EU, which is a good thing, but it's still higher than we would want it to be. And I suppose there are measures in place to try and stimulate that. But does the green transition actually, does it help in this way? I mean, do you think it will support initiatives to upskill young people? Will they have an opportunity to improve their employment prospects and quality of life?
I think what's important to look at the youth unemployment situation right now, or the NEET situation, it's that it's a very regional picture, phenomenon when we look at it. Okay, so when we look at it, we see certain regions have remained with fairly high needs. They've brought it down a bit, but they remain fairly high.
Needs, not in employment, education, or
exactly,
training.
not in employment, education, or training. But at the same time, these are regions that might not necessarily benefit from the dynamic of the green transition.
Sure.
Okay, so they can be linked if policy helps them to be linked, but they can also be delinked. But if we talk about the green transition, then we can say, well, here we're talking to young people's aspirations, right? So young people are fairly concerned about climate change and the implications of climate change. I mean, the concern is growing for the entire population, but the young people started from a higher level, so they remain at a higher level in terms of finding this concern. So engaging into being upskilled or reskilled to engage with the green transition, you could talk to the young people's aspiration, but once again, you need to make sure that the training opportunities are there. You need to make sure that the education opportunities are there and that the young people are actually able to engage with them, which means that you need to make sure that these skills can be acquired at a local level.
So there's a lot of space there for training and upskilling and education of young people in particular. And in fact, a question that came in from the audience here, I think this one is from James. It says, traditional industries are generally located outside of the urban centres. And here you're talking about the regional dimension of the youth unemployment, but not only. Could the further decline of these industries in Europe, in these areas, deepen the rural-urban divide? And in fact, that goes to what you're speaking about, Maria, but also maybe Massi, you would have a word or two to say on that.
Yes, it could, but it doesn't necessarily have to. I think some of the polluting industries that we have today that are located outside of the urban areas will transform towards the net zero economy. So if they're polluting today, they will not necessarily disappear. Okay, they will transform. Some of them will disappear. And then in that sense, and here getting back to Massi, with the regional dimension of this, yes, it could widen the urban rural divide. And OECD has done some work on trying to estimate what's the propensity of green skills, tasks that are linked to polluting industries. How is this divided regionally? And they see that in the urban areas, there's a high propensity of people with tasks that is linked to the green economy and less to the polluting, whereas in the urban, it's vice versa, as James says, it's mostly because of the location of industry outside of the urban areas. But if we go towards, if we engage into the green transition, it gives an opportunity to actually transform these industries towards going to the net zero economy. So yes, it could widen, but it could also give an opportunity to say, okay, if we go to the green transition, we have to ensure that all regions and localities go along with it. And that's the policy that you were talking about, do it people oriented, but also location oriented. So
it goes to the core of the cohesion approach of the European Union and what it's all about.
Completely. Yeah. And I think without this approach, we won't manage the green transition.
No.
We won't manage the green transition.
Manage many transitions.
Exactly.
Actually.
Yeah, any transition actually.
Yeah.
Because it requires social cohesion, it requires trust, and it also requires kind of a much more granular approach to understanding what's going to happen in these regions and how can we make sure that we get a virtuous circle in terms of transforming the industry, in terms of, some of the industries will close down, but then making sure that other industries are put in place.
Because this all dovetails into also what Barbara was talking about, the remote working. You have more people working. They look to work in the regions and the rural areas. We have to invest more for this to be possible. Not only digital broadband, which is what comes to everybody's mind when we talk about that, but childcare, education, health services, policing, for example.
Bank branch.
And what?
A bank branch.
And maybe even hairdressers. Massi, did you want to follow up on that?
I think that, what James says is what it has been observed in the last couple of decades, actually. Globalization has changed the geography of work, actually. And therefore, industries that earlier were located in rural areas, and there were economic reasons why these industries were in rural areas. One of them is that land costed less, actually, so it was cheaper to relocate in rural areas. Then with globalization, they were relocated abroad in other parts of the globe, actually, and this contributed actually to widen the gap between rural and urban areas. A specialized job remain in urban areas, and therefore talents moved from rural areas to urban communities, actually. So it's a bit a circle that has contributed on that. Now I think that it's important to make rural areas attractive, and as you said, actually, it's not just through digitalization. I mean, remote work provides a great opportunity actually for reverse the trend in rural realities. But it's just part of the same globalization. We need services. Sure. Services need childcare, education, and so in order to make the areas attractive for everyone, actually, and to improve the living and working conditions.
And sustainable as well, because it's also for when those young people who are brought up in those rural areas, is there a possibility for them to stay there, to build their lives there, to create their own existences into the future there? And I suppose it's a much longer term prospect that we should be looking at rather than just fixing the issues as things stand. I mean, coming back to that, there's a question from Laurent in Belgium, which I think feeds into this, Massi. It's the cost of living crisis was the main reason for increasing distrust when COVID phased out. So is, in fact, the standard of living mostly what matters in the end? Because the mismatch between standard of living and life satisfaction can be surprising and uses the example here, for instance, comparing France to Romania.
I think that it was one of the driver on this trust. Trust is extremely complex concept, actually, that bind us to our social contract, and the cost of living is one pillar of it. Clearly, with the cost of living, people started to find a gap, actually, between their realities and other realities and other narratives. But it's just one of the challenges actually that people see around, actually, or others. There is the tensions regarding migration. There is the geopolitical transformations, where we went out from COVID with a lot of other tensions. Actually, that contributed.
So it's not a linear equation in that way.
It's not a linear equation.
Yeah. No. Okay. And I suppose also the question, Barbara, which goes to you here about the the development of the digital economy. It's from Fernando, and is a potential source of discontent related to the development of the digital economy in that its promises are not being fulfilled. In fact, there is a reinforcement of the polarization between high-quality jobs, better salaries, promotion, possibility for teleworking, and lower quality jobs, as is the case for a significant part of platform work with a high presence of collectives such as young people and migrants. I suppose that speaks to a little bit what you were talking about that sort of fragmentation again of the situation.
The differences in access to remote working, to hybrid work possibilities, and then even if the theoretical possibility exists to engage companies' management not offering those possibilities. So that's the one divide, and then the other one that we have mentioned about what does it do for learning opportunities, for visibility, for promotion, and is there a difference then, or an emergent difference between those who engage in telework and remote work and those who are in the office more frequently. But I think another thing that we also need to look at in this context is that even though workers are very interested in engaging in telework, in hybrid forms of work, in a survey that we did in 2021, 60% of respondents said, yes, having the possibility to work at least a few days a week from home, that's what we would like to see. It comes with risks. The reason why people would like this possibility for a hybrid work arrangement is that working from home gives more flexibility in terms of working time, more autonomy, and therefore a better chance to achieve the work-life balance that you want. But the price you pay is this blurring of boundaries, that it's no longer clear this is working time and this is non-working time. Because, of course, if you take advantage of this flexibility and you stop working for a couple of hours because you pick up children, you supervise homework, you prepare meals, you have to make up for it. Late at night, early in the morning, periods that were regarded as free time.
That's the flexibility.
That's the flexibility. But that's why we see when we compare those who work from home to those who are always in the office, they report more frequently working during free time. They report more frequently working long hours. They report certain health problems like headaches and eye strain more often, and also work-life conflicts. This inability to switch off. Work is done, but you're still halfway there, and that prevents you from focusing on the family. So I think there's another risk of working conditions deteriorating, and therefore work-life outcomes showing poorer results that we need to address, and this being able to switch off, to disconnect is a very important part of this.
To be continued, that particular discussion on why to disconnect, as we know. But a question that's come in from Breach as well, and I'm very conscious that we always seem to end up talking about young people, which is a good thing. I am also conscious that there's 4 of us sitting around a table post-50 talking about what would be good for the young people. But when we're talking about young people, we should also take into consideration that we have an increasing aging population, and there are more older people than there are younger people. So we need to take account of their needs and the challenges that they're facing also. And Breed, I suppose, is motivated by that when she asks the question, as Europe ages, what needs to happen to ensure that this aging workforce can also manage the challenges and opportunities of the green and digital transitions? And maybe, Maria, can I get you to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, okay. So I think going back to the greening and the transitions in the regions that are particularly affected by this is a real challenge, because we have in the rural areas a shrinking population, a shrinking and aging population, right? So when we get these big transitions coming into that mix, we do get into a situation where it becomes more complicated to create a virtuous circle to generate a new tissue and redynamize these regions. And that's why I want to get back to the fact that it's important to ensure that the opportunities, when the restructuring is happening, that the real opportunities are there for the young people to remain in their localities. So I think that's one. So more generally, with regard to the aging demographics, on the labour market, we need to make sure that work remains sustainable all through your working life. It's not something that starts once you hit 50. Like, this is something that starts when you're 25, in ensuring that workplaces provide sustainable work that enables you actually to continue to work until retirement, statutory retirement age. And there I think Eurofound has done a lot of work, and Barbara can speak to some of the main factors on this. So that's one branch where I think also there's a lot going on within companies, realizing that they have to maintain their aging workforce. And how do they maintain their aging workforce? The second part of them is then that you get to a certain point where you start needing care, which means that we need a workforce that can provide this
support that,
and support this workforce. And here we know there's a huge labor shortage in the care sector, mostly linked to the fact that the working conditions are fairly dire, and the pay is not the best in the world. So we really have a kind of a bind in terms of saying we're going to get fewer younger people into the labor market. We've got an older labor force we need to maintain, but we're also getting into the fact that we need more people to be in the workforce to provide the care. And that means that we need to understand better how can we improve the working conditions for care workers, how can we improve the pay, and how can we make digitalization be a positive element in providing this care, not replacing or substituting, but in terms of helping to provide this.
And also to see the positive dimension, because there's an entire silver economy that exists with an aging workforce, which we can also tap into and to ensure competitiveness and growth. So, one of the questions, which is really the big question, we talked about briefly the social contract, and I am conscious that we're like 3 minutes away from wrapping up. So if you would all give me the liberty of just extending maybe 2 or 3 minutes beyond time today, because we have had so many questions that we want to look at. But the European social model, what are we? Who are we? And this is important as we look into the elections coming down the tracks. How, and this is a question from Ovidiu in Romania, what about the future and the role of social dialogue? Why is the European social model obsolete? Well, I don't know if that is actually the case, but, the danger, I suppose, is that we see that maybe, looming. What is the role of workers? And that speaks also to a question which came in also from Baptiste on, the greater contribution of workers to this whole process. Maybe, Maria, I'll ask you to use that as your kind of wrap up as to when we're looking to the future for the next phase. When we see the European elections and changes, what do you think we can see in terms of the European social model?
Okay, let me speak to the social dialogue bit on this one. Okay, so as has been kind of put on the table here, is that we are in a situation where we are going through major transformations, being it demographic, digital, or climate change related. Now, these transformations have to be to a certain extent based on trust, and that means that we have to have what I would call broadly as a governance model that enables us to manage these transitions. And here, social dialogue is key. Social dialogue is a very important part, both on European level, national level, and on local level, and on company level, to be able to ensure that these transitions are profound, are done in a manner that ensures that everybody takes the ownership of the transitions, and that there's a negotiation that takes place to ensure a win-win solution. So now it's a part and parcel of what we call the just transition, part and parcel of what we call leaving nobody behind. Social dialogue, we don't get social dialogue in and being a very big part of this. We won't be able to make a transition that leaves nobody behind. And I think that's really important to understand. So and there have been several initiatives to better engage social dialogue in various policy realms. Now there's a very diverse picture in terms of the weight and the input of social dialogue across the European Union. But I think some of the very successful countries have social dialogue as a very important part of how they manage their labour markets. And I think that kind of sets the picture out in terms of how we'll move forward with the transitions and how important social dialogue is in terms of managing the transitions and making sure nobody is
and seeing what works in other countries.
Exactly.
And how they're
Yeah.
managing this in terms of.
But even on a very local level, to see, how did social partners, together with other partners in the local region, actually help or instrumentalize and manage these processes in a positive manner.
Yes.
Yeah, can I answer this? I mean, I think it's quite obvious. Who would know better than the two sides of industry about how to manage these issues, how to prepare for change? So I would fully agree with Maria there that without social dialogue, it's very hard to see how we can manage the just transition or any other upcoming disruption and change that we will be facing. I think it also requires to prepare the social partners for these new tasks, because these are new issues: digitalization, artificial intelligence, greening, what's connected to this. So there is also a need for supporting social partners in building their capacity to deal with those issues that were not the traditional ones that they have been looking at in the past.
Okay. I mean, I would like to wrap up now because we are just over time. So, Massi, can I ask you maybe just to wrap up here saying, we have a new commission in place, we have a new European Parliament in place heading into 2025. What do you think we should be, or they should be, prioritising in terms of addressing the challenges ahead?
Well, first of all, listen to people and their needs. I think that one of the most pressing concerns will be housing. Housing is really affecting the life experience of a large part of the population in terms of insecurity and in terms of access to housing and the cost associated to it. So I think that addressing the housing issue in all the European member states would be extremely important.
Excellent. Brilliant.
I think it's to better understand and move forward in terms of how a just transition, being it digital or green, actually emerges not only on paper but in reality. I think that it's crucial.
It's a priority. Yeah. Barbara.
Well, if we focus on the area of working life and acknowledge that disruptions will be a permanent part of the future, we know that we need to have a more resilient and more adaptable workforce. But in order to achieve that, we have to have better job quality, because only an engaged, a ready-to-learn workforce, a workforce that is of high levels of well-being, good work-life balance, ability to make ends meet, only if these conditions are met can you expect people to be resilient and adaptable. And that's exactly what we need. So job quality remains very high on the agenda.
So thank you very much. Job quality, housing, just transition, digital and climate change. Certainly the new policymakers have their work cut out for them already, and the agenda is fairly full. But what we have learned today is certainly the European social model is not dead. In fact, it's critical for us to be able to move forward in tackling the challenges that we face down the line. And of course, what we covered today are only some of the challenges. You will find in-depth blogs from Massi on trust, from Maria on the just transition, and from Barbara on the future of work. You'll find them on our website, alongside an awful lot of other information talking about the challenges and the future of Europe. Our job is to try and facilitate and support changes which really do improve your lives and your work. That's our job. We hope this was part of it today. Please continue to give your comments. Thank you for engaging so much. I'm sorry if we didn't get to the final questions which came in the last few minutes. It's reminding me that we've a lot to talk about and that we should continue to do so. Thank you for joining us today. You can, of course, access all of this on our website, follow us on our podcasts, view the webinar today, and indeed others from the past. Again, access that on Eurofound.eu. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to my guests and speakers. And until the next time, have a lovely weekend.